You're looking for. Welcome to the Let's Talk Cabling podcast with Chuck Bowser, RCDD. Well, seeing how we're pulling Category 6A, the most powerful twisted pair in the world, you gotta ask yourself this one question. Did I pull 295 or 300 feet? Well, do you feel lucky? Do you, punk? What exactly does RCDD stand for? Registered Communications Distribution Designer. Just the expert you need to ensure your cable plant performs exactly as designed. The elite professional, knowledgeable, and experienced in leading-edge ICT design principles. Now, send the new guy to the truck for a bucket of dial tone and the cable stretchers, while you listen to an informative program on telecommunications.
Thursday night, 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. That can only mean one thing. Live after hours with your favorite RCDD. That would be Chuck Bowser. This is a special episode because I'm coming to you live from Austin, Texas. You can tell I'm not in the podcast studio, and I got some strange person sitting here next to me. So we are here because I am attending the PoE Consortium Symposium, and I'm helping them with this. So I have some industry thought leaders in the PoE field, and we're going to talk to them tonight. So if you have any questions about PoE, the PoE Consortium, or what we're even doing, make sure you put them in the chat box, because I have two industry experts. Because you know I'm not an expert in PoE. That's why I'm doing this stuff, to become learned with it and stuff. So my first guest with me is Matt Apfel.
Apple.
Yeah. He is one of the moderators here. So, Matt, why don't you just tell everybody a little bit about yourself?
Hey, thanks, Chuck. Good evening, everybody. My name is Matthew Apfel, Assistant Training Director of the Electrical JTC of Southern Nevada. In the wonderful world of information communication technology, I'm an RCDD tech, as well as a Bixby certified trainer. We get into all sorts of cool stuff down there where I'm from in Las Vegas, as well as FOA and a lot of other training programs. And we really like to get everybody into as much structure cabling, fiber optics, and emerging technologies as possible. And that's kind of how I ended up in this to begin with myself, just wanting to reach out and be part of everything possible.
So how long have you been in the industry?
Started in 1999. That was my first gig in the electrical industry, going through a vocational electronics program. Just never looked back. So, IBW now for 17 years, senior technician in IBW, with a passion for training and education. Just making sure that the emerging technology and everything that we have going on in this industry, no matter who does it, making sure that it's done well, making sure that everybody represents well, because what needs to make happen is that this industry needs to survive. It needs to thrive. It needs to grow. The awareness, the technology training, the credentialing needs to be there. And that's what we're doing, Chuck.
He's a perfect example of why I like the union. And I also like non-union too, but in our industry, you always hear this union versus non-union, right? And I got to admit, Matt, I got certification envy because you have more certifications than I do. You got
more years right here, buddy. You got more years.
Yeah, but years doesn't always, as Al Sharpton said, years in political office doesn't make you a political expert. Well, years in the industry doesn't make you an expert either. It just makes you old. Well, hence all the gray hair. So what's your function here at the PoE Consortium Symposium?
Kind of like yourself here as a moderator and facilitator.
There you go. Now talking.
There it is. Got to make sure the microphone, the directional microphone technology is awesome. Facilitator and moderator. Awesome events like this where we get people involved, people that are part of the industry that have the experiences. Well, those experiences need to be shared. And without people there to kind of wrangle these conversations together, it turns into the wild, wild west. So that's what you and I, Chuck, that's what I get to do. We get to play referee and wrangler here with some folks and get some great ideas out there into the space for these things. And like you said, I'm an IBW guy, but that's not what this is about.
No, it's not.
That this is about, and it's not even about my credentials versus your credentials. This is, no, it's not. I appreciate you for everything that you've done for this industry and these awesome podcasts that I follow every week. Even when on my off time, when I'm just reading white papers and things like that, I go back to pre-recorded podcasts and look at these things because it's a wealth of knowledge. It's awesome, you know.
We're having to share microphone because my backup microphone is not working. Remember my rule: 2 is 1, 1 is none. So I got it. See, look, there's the letters.
There it is.
There's the letters. So I got it facing right. I actually saw a video. Somebody shot me a text message the other day. They had a home gym, and so he's in his home gym. He's got a TV mounted wall, and he was watching one of my podcasts while he was working out. I was like, "That's dedication right there, buddy. That's dedication." So you got a unique view on this because you're IBEW, and you teach the Bixie curriculum, and you teach the FOA curriculum. So you got a unique view on this. What are you hearing about people in PoE? I know the electricians might be a little afraid of PoE because it might be taking the job a little bit, and the low voltage installers are probably thinking, "Hey, this is a new opportunity." So, what unique perspective can you bring since you're seeing both sides of that fence?
You know, that's a very, very awesome question, interesting conversation, and I'll give you my perspective and from my sphere of the universe. And this is my personal dealings, my experiences when it comes to this. You know, the electrical industry is a very, very dynamic beast. It's ever growing, it's ever changing, it's ever evolving, and the electrical workers in it need to be able to adapt. And I do run into a lot of folks that are qualified electrical workers that happen to be electricians, you know, journeyman wiremen, linemen, that they are not so adaptable when it comes to change, emerging technologies, perhaps a task that they have been so accustomed to for so long. You know, they don't like the idea of it changing. And that's both, you know, union electricians and then, you know, electricians for maybe working for themselves. Okay. I'm speaking of that for everybody across the board. And then the same thing can be said of technicians, you know, whether they're considered a low voltage installer or a sound and communications electrician or technician. Same thing, you know, they've been used to doing things for so long a certain way that now this emerging technology is forcing them to change and adapt as well. But you have other groups of people that are now realizing that this is a new industry of sorts. PoE, limited energy, distributed, you know, it's another way of distributing power. To lighting, to, you know, low voltage, limited energy appliances and whatnot. There are parts in the country to where within IBW that technicians and wiremen and electricians, they understand that they have a set of languages written into their contracts that they understand, they go by, and they coexist happily because they understand that the work needs to be done professionally, needs to be done well. And you do have some parts of the country to where they don't see eye to eye on whose work it is. They don't see eye to eye on who should be training it, whose work it is, or who should be performing it. But no matter what sphere you lie in, when there's a lack of communication, a lack of training and credentialing, ultimately the industry itself will suffer. And that's the bottom line, and that's the message that I've been trying to put to everybody that I've been interacting with this, both non-union and non-union, is that to make sure that the manufacturer at the end of the day is accurately represented, and that the customer at the end of the day has the product that they desire, and that they ultimately, you know, that they're getting what they wanted to begin with.
So here comes another loaded question for you, and try to hold the microphone a little close to your mouth because they're playing some music back there, right? And I want to make sure that everybody can hear us. So again, you have a unique perspective because you're looking at low voltage. You have face-to-face interactions with low voltage technicians. You have, and also electricians. What is the biggest challenge that a low voltage technician? Because that's my audience. I mean, I do have electricians, but by far the majority of my stuff is low voltage technicians. What's the biggest challenge that a low voltage technician is going to face when it comes to putting in PoE systems?
So one of the things that a lot of people like to throw out is the awareness, credentialing, and training when it comes to luminaries, when it comes to power delivery. Traditionally, low voltage electricians or technicians were dealing with, you know, exactly that, low voltage. Over the course of history, those are things that have been non-permittable, non-inspectable. Those are things that have been considered safe. So therefore, the understanding of electrical theory, Ohm's law, and whatnot has never really it applies. Don't get me wrong, but to a lot of low voltage installers, it really hasn't meant anything to them. They haven't had to get that in that understanding, that knowledge, that education when it comes to items that now all of a sudden are considered permittable or inspectable items. So a low voltage installer that's now installing PoE lighting or another item such as that, he's going to run into issues to where he does have to worry about things like code. He does have to worry about items within the NEC or other standards that he may not have already had his feet held to the fire on, so to say. As technicians, we're all familiar with TI, AEI, IEEE, BICSI, and whatnot, but not so much into the NEC, not so much into code, and that right there is going to be an obstacle. It shouldn't be, but it's just going to be another part of the education and a part of this curve that we're all going to be dealing with.
That's always a nebulous subject when you start talking about code versus standards, because standards always meets and or exceeds codes, but code goes in much more depth, right? And that's where low voltage people do fall down. Now, let me ask you a question about low voltage, electrical inspectors, right? Because I mentioned this many times before in the podcast. I'm building a studio. When the electricians were wiring up my studio, they asked me, where are the wires for the lights? I said, I'm doing everything PoE. And I might as well have been talking Spanish to them or German or some other language, because they just, what? They're electricians. They should know PoE. But the ones who are going to be inspecting are going to be the electrical inspectors. So what are your thoughts on, are electrical inspectors embracing this? Are they aware of it? Or are they just totally clueless?
Yes, and yes. And it depends on what electrical inspector it is and what jurisdiction or what the AHJ is. What year of the code cycle they're in. Are they working out of the 2014, 2017, 2020? I have some people in the AHJ where I'm around, I'm affiliated with, and they're already looking at the 23 code cycle. So your mileage may vary in that right there. But one thing across the board, though, is that when I get into projects and I'm looking at them, and it's all about what the standards and specifications for that project is, because there are some projects, even in Southern Nevada, to where it might be a Clark County Department of Aviation standards, which is completely separate since they're actually a government agency. They will uphold to a certain, set of facts. Dealing with those guys, then it is absolutely a matter of making sure that the project is installed as per standards and specifications and drawing. Some places and some areas, no, they don't know, they don't care, as long as it fits the minimum standards of whatever they're familiar with or whatever is adopted on the prints at the time of design, not even construction. So from my sphere, we do invite folks from our AHJ, and that's our fire inspectors. That's people in our county, city, state, people from our local government, OSHA, to make them aware of certain new emerging technologies. I just gave a little symposium not too long ago on NAC Article 726, talking about Class 4 power, fault managed power, talking about where that lies now in modern installations. They were not even aware that something such as digital electricity existed. And I said, but it's already installed. Look at a lot of large, IDAS, indoor distributed antenna systems. That technology is being installed. They didn't even recognize it for what it was. So to give them a little education on it, it definitely opened their eyes a lot.
Well, that definitely sounds like a challenge.
Yeah.
Because I sat in a BICSI conference a couple of years back, and one of the things they said, I went to the codes and standards meeting, and one of the things they said was, there are 50,000 electrical inspectors in the United States, which means they have 51,000 different opinions, right? We got a question here. Let's see what this question says. It says, so with PoE, do you see new standards for automotive Ethernet or different technologies where it's not always standard Ethernet, like HDMI versus Ethernet?
Oh, wow.
Is that a Tyler question?
That that might be a Tyler question. Okay, so I'm going to touch on a part of this. Okay, I will say that when it comes to the automotive industry, that's the same thing as the aeronautical, avionics, and whatnot. that will be a whole nother conversation right there. Okay, that's specialty stuff.
Let's
Yeah, let's do the PoE there. I do know that even talking about Ethernet and HDMI with Ethernet, things are evolving to where even HDMI with Ethernet is slowly being phased away, and you're starting to see more USB Type-C. Okay, in the 3-dot realm up and on, where you're starting to get 90 watts, 100 watts, 120 watts with 10 gigabit of throughput on there. So things are evolving. Different technologies which require smaller form factor pluggable and smaller form factor cable are the manufacturer realm is definitely driving those through user and consumerism. So the automotive question, that's a good point. I think that would be worth its own conversation later. What do you think, Chuck?
I think so too. Let's go ahead and switch over because we're at the halfway mark. So go ahead and switch spots. We'll bring in Tyler Andrews from PoE of Texas, and maybe he might be able to answer that question. If you have any questions on PoE, so George says we have questions on TikTok. George, go ahead and type the question here.
He wanted to know who the cameraman is.
Oh, this is the cameraman right here. Right here. That's the cameraman right there. So now we're going to shift the conversation. We talked to Matt about the installation side. So now let's talk to Tyler. Tyler, why don't you go ahead and just give us a quick 13 and a half second, and I'm going to time you. 13 and a half seconds, who you are and why everybody should listen to you.
Name is Tyler Andrews. I'm the CEO of PoE Texas. You should listen to me because I managed to get this guy to come to Austin to hang out with us. So obviously I have good taste. Let's be honest with each other. So I managed to convince Matt and Chuck to come here for the PoE Consortium. I'm the vice president of the PoE Consortium and the guy who's putting together the installer symposium that brought these two really smart guys here to Austin. And I'm really excited to have you guys here. This is a big deal. For those of you who don't know what's going on, we're flying in 6 of the best PoE lighting installers from around the country. They're all meeting here to talk about best practices, to network, and to figure out how that lighting industry is going to go well. And Chuck and Matt are here to help gather that information. And Chuck is going to actually be hosting a webcast tomorrow night with all of those installers. So I'm really excited to see what you come out of that with for your audience.
Yeah, that's going to be recorded and posted at a later date. That's not going to be live. So that'll probably air mid-January because we're going to have like 6 different microphones. So I'm going to have 6 different audio tracks, and I've never done anything that big. So it's going to take me some time to crunch that. So it'll come out probably mid-January. But yeah, I'm looking forward to that. The challenge there is to keep that one to under an hour. That's going to be the challenge, right? So the first question I want to ask you is, and when you start talking about PoE, people usually fall in one of 3 camps. When they think of PoE, they think of PoE cameras, PoE access points. There's the people who don't know what PoE is or never heard of it, and then there's what like people like the experts, like we're bringing in tomorrow. So can you give us a good general overall description? Let us know it's more than just that PoE to that camera. It's more than just that. What all is PoE?
What is PoE as a technology is the ability to take power and data and put them onto one cable. Now, what you do with that can be wildly different. There's a huge spectrum. What I will tell you is it is the technology where smart buildings are migrating to. Like you talked about, at first it was just IP phones, right? Cisco came up with this idea, hey, we could power IP phones. And then pretty soon somebody's like, hey, we could do IP cameras. And, oh, we could do Wi-Fi access points. But what's happened is over the years, it has started to become the de facto standard for smart building technology. Laptops, tablets, screens, sensors, anything that's IoT. And when you get to the big stuff, you get lighting, shades. And this is a really cool one that not many people know about, just straight building automation. We control AC loads over PoE like you would normally use industrial equipment for. And that's kind of a fun new area where we're really starting to push the boundary and the edge of what PoE does. because number one, it's all on one network. It's an industry standard, and it is something that everybody has in their building.
That's a great point. There's many standards that drive our industry. We have the bonding and grounding standard, the administration standard, commercial building standard, standard for residential, standard for hospitals, standard for industrial premises. There's not a whole lot of verbiage for PoE standards. Do you think the industry needs to establish a PoE standard before best practice, or do we need to do a best practice before a standard? If that makes sense.
Well, there is a standard. There's the IEEE 802.3 standard. It was written by the Institute of Electronics and Electrical Engineers. It's a great read, by the way. If you've never read it, it's very exciting, very dramatic. It's like reading The Notebook, but I'm going to give you a spoiler alert. Power and data get together in the end. It's a very romantic story. But yeah, there is an IEEE standard for PoE. And in fact, uniquely, Power over Ethernet is the only globally accepted power standard. If you're in Tokyo or in Tulsa, it's the same. If you're in New Zealand or New York, it's the same. And that's really unique about PoE. And in fact, that's really what drives so much PoE adoption is I can be anywhere in the world. I can choose PoE as a power communication standard, and I can guarantee that that will work with 98% of the other PoE devices in the world. So that's actually unique. Now, it does mean that the installation standards are always trying to catch up and keep up. And that's what I know you guys are really interested in about is how do I install it properly? And that is a big question. And that's one, interestingly enough, the PoE Consortium would like to help tackle. That was a great lead in. Thank you, Chuck. We have an whole industry standard organization trying to build the industry standards for lighting, automation, how you take PoE and something that used to be strictly phones and cameras and apply it to buildings in general. Now, we did have a question. Somebody was telling an interesting story on TikTok that I thought was compelling.
Okay.
So, and I apologize. I know you were emailing or he was texting it in there, and I didn't want to interrupt you and Matt, but the story was he had a wicking issue with his cat cable. And when I first saw wicking, I'm like, what the hell is he talking about? I've never heard the term wicking. But what it was is somebody had used an outdoor cable and crimped on a pass-through RJ45 connector outdoor and then left it outside uncovered. Well, apparently what happened is somewhere along the way, it rained or some mist or came up and it sucked it. It wicked. And you used the right term. It was actually correct. It wicked it right up into the cable. And then a few days later, the PoE camera came. Somebody plugged in the PoE camera. The PoE camera warmed up and it sucked the water right back out of that cable into the camera through the pass-through connectors. So this is an interesting one. I hear the debate, and maybe I can ask a question. Closed-end RJ45s versus pass-through RJ45s. I know there's a big debate out there. I'm curious what you guys are thinking. Do you do pass-through? I've done a lot of pass-through. I like pass-through. I mean, obviously, I'm a little bit picky about how the cables trim and how it looks, but is pass-through okay or is pass-through a no bueno?
Oh, Lord, that's a great question. And we only have 8 minutes, so we'll have to figure that one out. So, yeah, so modular ends come in either pass-through connectors or the traditional. And there's a huge debate because old school people like the traditional ones because that's what they've always installed. They don't like the pass-throughs because you got the bare copper sticking out the end. Although there is one or two manufacturers that make little bars to put across that so it protects those. But it's still kind of open. It's not sealed off like a traditional. If I'm doing an inside, if I'm doing like an NPTL inside of the building, I'll go either way. It just depends on what I have. Outside plant application where it's going to be exposed to moisture, I'm going to want a traditional, and I'm going to want that thing in some kind of IP67 rated system because water, take it from somebody who lives in Florida, water gets into everything. Now, here's the thing. Here's one question I want to ask you based on that. If water gets on a low voltage cable, that's going to raise insertion loss. It's just going to cause the data signal not to work right. What is it going to do to that DC current if that DC current gets wet?
Ooh. That's interesting. That's a good question. If you're talking about when it gets into the switch or into the PoE device, yeah. In the cable itself, from a PoE perspective, it probably won't do anything to the current because typically when that water gets in, there is that plastic shielding around each of the individual conductors. So even if it gets inside the outer sheath, it doesn't actually get into, unless it really soaks through. I think your biggest risk would be corrosion at that point. But what your user, with the guy who's telling the story online, is saying is your bigger risk is that water enters into the electronics at either end. And frankly, that's the really expensive stuff. Water does damage electrical equipment. It lets out the magical green smoke that held all the magic holding the electronics together. What it should do, I know with some switches, if it shorts out if it manages to short out between the two of them, most switches, PoE switches, have a short circuit protection that'll just turn off the power to the port. But if you want to know what it would actually do, is it was most likely you'd see the port blink on and off about every 10 seconds because it would try and renegotiate the PoE, turn it on, see a short, and drop it out. So that's really what you would see. But it happened pretty quickly if it was going to do something on the cable.
So when you first got on, you said PoE, you said digital electricity, and you also said fault managed power systems.
That was Matt.
Was it you? I thought it was Tyler that said that. Are they all the same animal or are they different?
That's a good question. They're not.
Same.
They're not the same. They're not the same in that fault managed power is just a general term for anything that monitors the power to shut it off in case there's a problem. Now, there is a class 4 power. The NEC code just came up with a new term for class 4. Class 4 is specifically for fault managed power that may not be covered in any of the other classifications. PoE is also technically fault managed power, but it's already considered class 2 because it's under 60 volts and under 100 watts. But it's still fault managed. Volt server, digital electricity, those are trademarked terms for volt server, and it is a form of digital electricity. Panduit has one now that is fault managed power, and a couple of other people. Who's it? CommScope. Yep, CommScope has one now. So I know those three are the fault managed power, and those would be considered class 4. What's interesting about those is they're above class 2. The difference between class 2 and class 4 is you have to be above 100 watts or above 60 volts. Then you can go for fault managed power in class 4. Now, what's interesting about that is so far, I don't know anyone, and then this is the challenge out there, I don't know anyone who sends fault managed power with data combined. Most people I know just do fault managed power. PoE is fault managed power with data combined, but it's got that 100 watt limitation. Have I cleared up like mud?
Yeah, that's clear as mud. Yeah, I got that.
I figure you're from Florida.
Now what's going to happen is I'm going to go to sleep tonight. I'm going to wake up tomorrow. I'm going to totally forget what that was because I'm old. Where do you see PoE going? Because I mean, it's come a long way since the PoE phones, right? Where do you see it going in the future?
That's a great question. I think where you're going to continue to see is PoE being adopted by more things and more people to accomplish more goals. I'm not sure, because PoE is right now at the upper limit of class 2 power. Do I think PoE is going to go to 300 watts? Probably not. There's probably a little bit more room for more power. It can already do 1 gigabit, 2.5, 5, 10 gig, 40 gig. It's on CAT cable. If it can send the CAT cable, you can send PoE with it. So I don't think there's any room to go up for data. But I think what you're going to see most likely is people figuring out what all you can do on PoE that we're not doing today. So you're going to see more applications, whether that's screens, sensors, concepts. I think you're also going to see it just become more of a thing that people see more often. It's the adoption rate is starting to go up and become more adopted. are we going to see some radical, magical standard change? Not yet. I don't think so.
Wow, we're already at our 30-minute mark, and we just scratched the surface. Just scratched the surface. So
It's like a scratch and sniff sticker.
yeah, there you go. There you go. So make sure you stay tuned to the social media feeds as I put out more stuff. And also make sure you watch out for that episode that's going to come out in mid-January. So until next time, everybody, remember, knowledge is power.